Have you ever felt the universe pulling you towards something greater? A moment when everything changes, a pivotal point in history? That moment is now. The cosmos is aligning. Ancient prophecies, astrological signs, and secret codes all point to this singular event, the X moment. On Friday, October 25th, 2024, at 3 p.m. Pacific, join us live as David Palmer, the Leo King, unveils secrets long hidden from the world. Secrets decoded from the works of his Hypergate schools and 12 years of decoding. This isn't just another live stream. It's your final call to power. Imagine unlocking unprecedented personal strength, transforming your life with knowledge reserved for the select few, ascending to a higher state of being during humanity's greatest shift. Every civilization has its defining moment. This is the one that defines all civilization. This is yours, but time is running out. Hundreds of thousands have already embarked on this journey with David Palmer. They've transformed their lives. Now it's your turn. Do you want to fully understand the Leo King's biggest prediction in all time? The window to transform your destiny is closing fast. Will you let this moment slip away? Or will you step forward and claim the future that awaits you? Join us live on High Vibe TV, accessible worldwide. Visit highvibe.tv to secure your spot now. Prepare for a life-altering experience that will elevate your consciousness and unlock your true potential. The X moment is here. Are you ready to seize your destiny, or just think it's another day in time?
What's going on, everyone? It is David Palmer, Leo King, and Dr. Wohlcke here for History in the Stars, where today we're going to be doing the history and the astrology going into political parties in the past. And no, not just America, but all over the Western world. Of course, I'm joined with Dr. Wohlcke here at the High Vibe TV Hypergate Studios. What's going on? How are you doing, Ann?
I'm doing wonderfully today. How are you?
I'm doing really good. I've been really excited to do this, especially we got an election coming up here. And it's kind of nice because it kind of does distance ourselves from the political craziness of the moment and kind of like look back at, you know, where did these parties start? Why did they start? Is there any astrological correlations? And I don't know, it's an interesting way to look at history, especially when we're in a moment that's going to create history, if that makes sense.
We're in a moment that is history.
Right?
We're always in a moment that is history.
That's true.
Shall we have a philosophical discussion about that?
I think so. But yeah, so I would say that I'm really interested because, you know, this came up after we did our show 2 weeks ago. It was like, what's going to be next? And we were out in the parking lot, and I'm like, or maybe it was after we just did that Uscreen event or something, and it was like there's something about, you know, let's like people forget it was the Democratic Republican Party. Like it was like they were together and then they split off, but they didn't split off traditionally like you would think. Like the Republican Party didn't get made until after a Whig Party and after all this stuff. So there's like an interesting history to it all. But then when you look around the world, it's like all these ideas of whether it was the founders and when they got to the Constitutional Convention, Federalist Papers, this idea of like parties wasn't a real hot ticket, and then eventually it happens. or even just like around, like in the monarch or the parliament that was the parliamentary monarchs. It's like, I still have trouble with that system.
With the parliamentary system?
Correct, yeah.
So you're wondering, you're wondering what the parliamentary system is now, or are we going to just stick to the past?
No, I think it's a great open discussion and a look at it. But to me, it's like, okay, it's nice. You have some say as people, but there's an overall, at the end of the day, if it got weird, queenie or kingy.
There's always a big daddy or mommy in charge.
Correct. Whereas in America, that person in charge can be checked.
Right. Well, it's supposed to be checked, right? Ideally, in America, the person in charge is supposed to be checked by the separation of powers, and that's all over the documents written by the early Americans as they were trying to come up with the policies of how the United States would work. And it's interesting in preparing for this episode. Of course, I'm a British historian, and early on in America it was Britain, so I'm a historian of that part. And I've been looking at the Federalist Papers while preparing for this. For some reason, I started to think about what did the founders actually want to be happening, and how did political parties emerge? Because as a British historian, I know that in the 18th century especially, there's a famous history book called The Rage of Party, and it talks all about how political parties started to emerge, and especially after the English Civil War, and then on, it became difficult for people within government to feel that there was representation on many levels. And one of the problems was this idea of factions, that you could have one group that could come in and take over and then run the government from behind the scenes because they take over. And what had been happening in British history with the Georges, that we talked about, King George III, right?
Yep.
And it was a big deal for him because he had to have a regent by the end, but the party behind the monarch often got to have a lot of influence on politics. And so, and it was also that the son of a monarch could be kind of co-opted by a party and then ruled by that party behind the scenes. And then they'd play the son and father off of each other, or they'd try to get in and get the ear of the queen. So it was really,
It was lobbying before lobbying, today.
Right. It's why lobbying is kind of confusing to think that we emerged into this place that has lobbyists like we do. I don't know how, reading the Federalist Papers that I can't even pronounce, I am wondering how in the world did we ever let this situation evolve in the United States? Because it was discussed in many, many, many papers in the Federalist Papers, this idea of not allowing factions to take over.
I'm pretty sure if you were to be the planets and you were up, and let's say you're the Earth, and you're like, how did I end up having this moon to revolve around me? Well, I have to revolve around the sun, but that moon has to revolve around me while I'm revolving around the sun.
So you think...
Meaning that like there's a natural human
right
and universal need for opposition, and it's in contrast, whether it's the hero's journey with the villain, right, or the bad person in a movie or in our spiritual lives, or the person that we fall in love with in life, right? But there's that, okay, we have common traits and we don't have common traits, and how do we work those things out? Like, that's just part of the whole human, so like, that's where it's like some people like, I don't know, that like you could tell when it's like an honest debate. I think debate's good to have when serious situations comes. I mean, imagine if you lived alone on this planet and you were just debating yourself. It would probably look like crazier than this. Mm-hmm. Kind of reminds me of like Tom Hanks, like when he was in Castaway.
Right.
I mean, but you're turning beach volleyballs into you know, the blood from your hand and turning into a person, and how you guys are making decision. You're making a decision with the beach volleyball.
Right.
I could imagine taking the 8 billion people or however many there are now on this planet and putting them through that situation and seeing what every movie would be. That would be an interesting movie. I could just watch those for the rest of my life. It'd be fine. Everybody's decisions would be so just based off themselves. They would create a person that really doesn't offer too much opposition. When you're a child, your teddy bear is not your opposition, your best friend. So it's when we go to school that you'll never forget your first enemy, like the first person who doesn't like you or you don't like, right? Back, like you'll never forget that, because that's part of where then you try to show up more in recess as a guy, right? It's like, oh, I'm gonna play handball better, right? Like to show that guy that I'm better at handball. I don't know how girls do it, but you know, there is that way of like, we're meant to go through these things. And I think that no matter how much we always think the best of things and how it can be, the human instinct's going to come out.
Yeah, the human instinct that I would say our founding fathers understood the human instinct, and they tried to build a system that could work with it, because factions are something that happens. People want to naturally, you have your enemy, or you have the people that you resonate with.
Right.
And you want to click together, and you want to win, and you want to have a voice. You want to represent everybody. You want to have control, I guess. But they tried to set up a system in which you can have that healthy disagreement.
Yeah.
But one faction was never supposed to win and sort of become a tyrant against the minority voices being also able to have a voice.
I think that's what you hit. It is like the whole point of the systems now is to give this, some people will call it an illusion. Some people will say like the actuality of giving, whether it's, okay, we're all the people in America and we're all equal. And so we choose other people to go play the roles of keeping the Union and the Republic together. Mm-hmm. And they keep it kind of simple with that. But in a parliamentary monarch, it's like, well, this allows those people down there to feel like that they're in control of their little things and societal things. Well, we're up here and we make the end call at the end of the day, if it gets too much, which is kind of an interesting, so it's giving that minority, even though it's the majority. Mm-hmm. That's the irony of politics, is why it's Capricorn ruled, right? It's like, they always say the minority. Really, it's like the majority, right? Like, oh, the minority out there, we're looking out for the little guys and all that. It's like, everybody's the little guy. You're the only one up there. 300 people are the one making all the choices and decisions and choosing how the money's spent and making all your deals. And the other 330 million of us don't really do much. Mm-hmm. We just can cast a vote.
Well, we just can cast a vote, and that's pretty powerful.
It is.
And I guess coming out of the system that our founders came out of, that, in that system, especially in the 17th and 18th century, people were voting for their local member of parliament, but not everyone could vote. Not all men could vote. You had to meet certain very strict qualifications to be able to vote. And in that case, you're voting for your one member of parliament who's going to go on and represent you, but is also going to have a whole other part of parliament that's not even elected. These are just the appointed people who know better than you because of their birth, and you just accept that. Or you have the members of the church, and they're part of the of that part of Parliament, the House of Lords. And so the founders, saw how that worked. And I guess the reason that breaks down, a monarchy and a parliamentary monarchy can work in theory, if your leaders truly care about the people they're representing, right?
Right.
If it's all about, well, wow, I was endowed with this right and I have to rule for the people and it's a privilege and an honor and I need to do it with the utmost respect, and you're trying to further everybody's lives,
Right.
but it turns into whoever has access to the monarch is the one who's getting their rights represented, and other people who don't have access don't. And so I think the founders were trying to develop a system in which you could have factions within it, but they weren't going to overtake the whole system. So they had the separation of powers. So for example, people elect their representative, and the idea is that the way that works is that the representative is supposed to be accountable to the people electing them,
Right.
and not have lobbyists trying to take their attention away, right? So
Right.
the idea is that when you have an educated public, they're not going to vote for people who are going against their interests. So I think that's the first place that whole system can break down. And
Yeah.
then secondly, there was an idea that a faction of some sort wasn't supposed to be able to capture all areas of government, so that you can't, for example, have one interest that's capturing or paying off the Supreme Court and the Senate and the House of Representatives and the president, and all of that. Like, that was their idea, that they were trying to make it as hard as possible for one group and one group to try to control, or to even think they could control, because the idea of factions also created fighting all the time, so that it wouldn't be an unstable society.
Well, and I think the most interesting part of the United States and its Constitution with the Supreme Court is that the executive gets to make the choice of a Supreme Court justice who gets a lifetime term, and they've thrown it up to God's fate of when they either retire or die. Mm-hmm. So that's the chance part of it, where, Trump got really lucky. If you really look at the data of Supreme Court, out of any president to be able to be you know what, I'm picking 3 in one term, that's not normal, and not, there's presidents who go 8 years for 2 terms and don't get to even elect or put one up, but it has to be approved by the Senate. So that's the interesting part too, is you could put somebody up and then the Senate's nah. And if a majority of that Senate, bipartisan, don't like it, then that won't end up. So there is a lot of checks and balances with it all. And that's why I think it's interesting to me, is especially because that's been a really hot part of the Civil War, was about the Dred Scott case, right? And then now it's with the Roe versus Wade now, and it's the Supreme Court has the lowest rating it ever has, but it was also extremely low in 1857 after the Dred Scott case. And it's that's just kind of how it works. It's interesting because I think a lot of people have such heated, upset feelings about this stuff, but feelings in politics really don't work too well when it comes to understanding how it works. That's why most people don't become politicians, because they wouldn't be able to handle the heat. And that's why a majority of politicians are lawyers, because you want to understand the laws, and you want to understand how it works. And that's what's cool about, to me, the Federalist Papers, is it's the actual way that they got to finally find enough of 2 factions, right? The Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, to come together and actually at the convention agree upon a constitution and a federalized system in a republic and so there's parts of that too where they gave that 12 year okay, by 1800, if nobody's wanting to change these, it's set in stone. And I can't believe the media doesn't tell people that, which makes me a little sad. So the idea of getting rid of the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, the second one especially, right? They always say, we want to get rid of it. You can't. It's impossible. Literally, they only gave till 1800. And at the Constitutional Convention and after the Constitution is done, it's in my I have the first Federalist book. I don't know if you remember, but I paid a lot of money, thousands for that thing.
You should have got that out.
It's over there. I can go get it. I have to move a camera anyway. But it's weird because it says in there, and that's why I have it, because even online it doesn't say it. In our own government, and they won't show you that because it's just to get a vote.
Right.
But the truth is you cannot take it away ever. Even the line in that one, of course, is like, it shall not be infringed on, right? But the back of those is, no, by 1800, if it hasn't been changed, these are the 10 that will always stand forever, no matter what. You can't change it. Constitutional Convention can't change it either.
Yeah. You know, I was just
Isn't
thinking,
that interesting? They don't tell people that, though.
Yeah. No, as you were talking about this also, and, you know, I was just thinking about the fact that you have this new nation. They've had a revolution, made it through, went against the British Empire, getting ready to be an empire, right?
Right.
And they won, right? And here's this group of people trying to figure out how to govern the new nation, and they're excited about it. I was just thinking about how you would have, we've talked about the generations, right? So you've got the Pluto Libras and all those, and the Pluto Leos, probably still a few of them kicking around. And
I think there was very few. I think it was all Pluto, Libra, and
Benjamin
Scorpios.
Franklin hung on a long
Sagittarius,
time.
yeah.
But then just think about being Pluto Sag, right? Because that's where Gen Z is now. And they're out and excited. They actually get to build the new world. So imagine these fiery people arguing with each other about, how's the government going to work? Are we going to have a national bank or are we not? Are we going to have political parties? What, you know, just arguing over every detail and getting excited about it, posting it in the social media of their day, printing it all out in the Federalist Papers, right? Keeping the press cranky.
Under old, you know, Greek names.
Yeah, I mean, so just, but that they knew all that. That was their, that's what they were excited about. That was their, I don't know what, their meme culture. Like
Right.
they knew all the classical references and all of that. And I just, I'm thinking about how involved and excited people were in the process, that it never had to be built into the Constitution that everybody will be mandated to learn about the Constitution, right? They were
Right.
so excited about the idea of even having laws to protect themselves. And also, there were many people who knew they hadn't gone far enough with the protections in the Constitution and the rights. So the idea
Right.
was it would always go further. So just to think about the fact that today you have politicians who are the lawyers, and we all sit back and elect them, and that's great. And there's a lot of good politicians out there who know their stuff. And we have to think local level too, right? Local to the national. But we're not as fired up about it. And so it's so easy to become complacent and not think about like how we should be active in ensuring our own liberty and governance, because that's how it was all conceived, to be something where we all take part and where we wouldn't be so disempowered that we could allow the parties to become so involved in the process, to be able to even decide who gets to run to be a president, or to be electing people who are going to know more than us about the laws. We should all know that. I don't know. So
I think you're right. We should all know that, and that's why the Federalist Papers are actually the understanding of why the Constitution is the way it is. I thought I would just share. Here's like a pamphlet from the Federalists that would have been going out, but if you notice, like, you don't see Madison or Hamilton's name. They go by these pseudonym names, right? These names that are Greek because of the understanding of the First Republic. And what's really interesting is the very discreet way of whether it was Nostradamus and his book going into When the Republic Returns, there's this really big, 1,500 years later of like, I wish the Republic was back. That the Greek Republic and the understanding of a Senate and the understanding where people could actually have that role in the way that things operate was admired, still admired today. So it all comes back to that Greek and to the Roman times, but it's mainly that Greek understanding. And that's what I thought was interesting, because in many ways, like, this is trying to convince people in a not constitutional republic. It's the literal, just like, these states that have all joined together, they're all bound together by the Articles of Confederation, and there is no big centralized federal system. There is no main president making the rules for all the states. It's the governors of each state. And they have to kind of get brought into this, like, hey, here's this piece, here's this piece, here's this piece, to get people to be willing to accept it. And I think that's what's really interesting is the wars, won in 1781, and it's like 6 years later, let's start throwing this out and have a convention. So if you actually really think about, it's all Pluto Aquarius, and it's all interesting that the last episode we did was about secret societies. Mm-hmm. And so there's the secret society element of it, because the esoteric parts of all this work is spiritual work, is all based upon a lot of Greek mythology, right? So there's a lot of that built into it. It's way deeper, but I'm just trying to like keep that surface, because the people can go watch that other episode. Mm-hmm. But it's like, that's what has been brought into it. And so it's another interesting part, just so people understand, in the astrology of that Pluto and Aquarius time coming to where it's at its halfway through the transit to the last part of it, is when they actually go into these Federalist Papers, and this is where I'm going to move the camera really quick, is that they actually are talking about the convention. They're going under these different names, like Philo Publius, meaning either friend of the people, right? But like, people actually knew Greek. If you were college educated back then, you would understand all these things.
Grammar school educated, really. I mean.
Oh, that's why you're the historian.
But could you put my screen on before you go?
Yeah.
Because then I'll look at one of the Federalist Papers, because this goes to your point. So if you look at Federalist number 9, this is an Alexander Hamilton one, and he starts with saying, a firm union will be of the utmost moment to the peace and liberty of the states as a barrier against domestic faction and insurrection. It is impossible to read the history of the petty republics of Greece and Italy without feeling sensations of horror and disgust at the distractions with which they were continually agitated, and the rapid succession of revolutions by which they were kept in a state of perpetual vibration between the extremes of tyranny and anarchy. And then the calms only were short-lived in contrast to the furious storms. So this was the history that Alexander Hamilton and all of the people writing the Federalist Papers, all the founders knew this history. So they were trying to avoid a situation in which you could have petty republics, which the states were imagined to be like, right?
Right.
So the states are these petty republics, but not have to worry about them continuously being overtaken by one faction or the other, right? So I feel like they worried so much about this possibility of parties kind of taking over that I wonder if we haven't been as vigilant ourselves. I wonder, why did we slide into kind of having this party system and allowing it to run politics for the people? So that's one question. But
so I have a good historical question for you.
Okay.
Was Alexander Hamilton, Jan, what's what was that show? It's not the Millionaire Show with
Who Wants to Be
Who
Millionaire?
Wants
Can
to
I
Be
phone
a
a friend?
Historical Millionaire?
Can I phone a U.S. historian friend?
Was Alexander Hamilton a Freemason?
Oh. Did we talk about this once? I remember seeing something about it.
But there's a very interesting
'Cause
thing
I
about
don't
that
think-
whole thing.
I don't think he was, right? Or was he?
Final answer?
I don't know. I'm sure he was.
No.
They're all Freemasons.
No, you're right. He was not a Freemason. And there was a painting depicted of him being in a lodge. He never was one. And this is actually from the Grand Lodge of Ohio and the Education Center saying Hamilton was never a Mason. The myth seems to stem from a painting entitled The Petition, which depicts a meeting of the American Union Lodge. The lodge met to consider a petition to create a general grand lodge for the United States, and with Washington as the general grand master, the artist decided to take some artistic license and included Hamilton, a non-Mason, in the painting.
Where is he standing up there?
Yeah.
Usually has the brown hair. Huh.
But the idea of the way that it's governed and the way that these all things came out is you have to remember that out of all those founding fathers, it's only like 7 or 8 that were Masons out of the many that signed the Declaration of Independence. But even when I was reading Alexander Hamilton's, you could tell he's not coming. He's looking at it as, they're not really happy. People don't end up being happy, and the Senate really never becomes powerful because then there's the history is, no, I'm going to become emperor now, and the Senate's going to lose its power. It reminds me of monarchs, right? It's like, this monarch looks like they're really nice, they're really cool, and then the next one comes in and like, nah, I'm not cool with this.
Right.
Right. So that happened in Greece too.
Yeah.
So that's where Hamilton, I think, has that more like, no, hold on. And then you have other people who are really hardcore Federalists that want some sort of order. There are a lot of them are the Mason ones.
A lot of Federalists in the Masons as well.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, I wonder if Masons were more Democratic Republicans, just because Hamilton was a Federalist. And you would think maybe somebody who's into this larger order above everything else, like that maybe he would have liked the Masons. I don't know. So it's just
here's an interesting other fact that the anti-Masons in the early 1800s put forth the story that Aaron Burr was expelled from Masonry after his duel with Alexander Hamilton, despite no evidence that Burr was ever a Mason. So that's another interesting part of the whole thing, right? Is like Hamilton is not a Mason, yet Aaron Burr does kill him.
I wonder if it's just a generational thing. I wonder by the time they were around, maybe they thought of it as just like an old guys club. I'm just trying to think of them as the youth, the crazy youth of today, who aren't so crazy.
Well, that's what's weird is in American politics, like there's always this
Mm-hmm.
whether it's establishment, right? Mm-hmm. There was the anti-Mason movement, right?
That was a party, right? I was looking up when the anti-Masonic party was active.
Yeah,
active
never
from
won.
The late 1820s, because I remember it being mentioned in one of your books. I was looking at that. So in the 1820s, it's in the Northeast. It declined quickly after 1832 as most members joined the new Whig Party. So that was after the decline of the Federalist Party, right?
Yeah, I mean, the
And
Federalist
so-
Party ends Jefferson, 1800.
So the Federalists were anti-Mason, which is interesting. They must have wanted a visible national presence, not an underground brotherhood that was secret, sort of.
Yes, and well, yeah, I think it's like they're part of some sort of club, and we don't want that. Yet, the irony is like it's kind of, I don't know. I mean, there was also the the fear that Masonry maybe, was too dark. Like some people think all that stuff is like against Christianity, yet there's so much Christianity in Masonry. It's insane.
Well, maybe that was the argument, that it was too full of Christian imagery. And if you're into the classical imagery, secular Enlightenment values, maybe you wouldn't be into it. But
and that Masonry has its beginnings in Europe, and then especially the Scottish Rite, which you would think actually maybe you would like the Scottish if you were about being American. Scottish always had the guts to say F you back too. But there is a huge faction of it in England still, so there could be this, they're still brothers, whatever country they're in. Right,
so you have, again, it's like that fear of an organization that transcends the national or your government. And it's just like people's fear also of the Roman Catholic Church, right? That your allegiance is really to the Pope, not to your own leader.
Yeah.
So it might be a similar fear of external influences.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that party never did become a president. There was no anti-Mason president, but they got some positions, but it wasn't enough to like move the needle. But I think what's interesting is that they do move to the Whig Party, which that's kind of an interesting party because it really does do some things, but it actually causes a lot of the roots of Republican now to form. So the Republican Party has been an ever-changing party. Like it never really has stuck with just staying Republican.
Right. I mean,
it's the one party that continues to change names. So like to me, that's kind of like anti-Mason is anti-establishment. And then it's like an anti-federalist, right? And then it's like, oh no, okay, now we're in the Whig Party. And the Whig Party was against the beginnings of what was happening in the South, slavery and so forth. And especially tariffs that were not being used to bring money into the country by all the Southerners who were growing the cotton, using the slaves to have all the tobacco and all that stuff, and making deals with other countries on their own without at least America being able to be like, hey, let's make some tax money, because that's how actually there was no income tax, right? It was all about in trade how we make the money, and that's what pays for the federal government. That's where all that Whig Party really got involved.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Somewhere I have a timeline.
Oh yeah, that's
this.
Perfect to show people.
Let me see that because it's interesting what was happening. I know we've looked at the election of 1800, but that's really where so much
Jupiter,
happened.
Saturn,
and it's right before
Pluto,
that.
Pisces.
It was actually up here. I don't think this this time this one doesn't have it. I have a different graphic or a different timeline somewhere that shows right before 1800 you have the passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts.
That's right now something that Trump's trying to talk about.
Interesting, and I need to find that. So let me try to find it. I don't know if you could take my screen off because it's so interesting, so similar to today. And if you're saying it's exactly our astrology, then
it literally is being talked about right now, like that Trump's looking to use that act.
Okay, so he's actually talking about it right now.
Correct. Well, because it's an act that can be used.
I think maybe I was trying to get
that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that's what's so weird about the media. Like you and I were talking how, like, we look on both sides, and they're saying the same things, just totally different, but it's the same meanings, the same fear and the threat. And look at this person, and look at the people they hang around are bad. And all that, and whether it's Marxism or whether it's fascism, it's just like they're both at those extremes, calling the other side mud sludging each other with the same stuff, just different.
Right. All right, I don't know if you want to put this up, because this is the overview from ChatGPT of the Alien and Sedition Acts, because I was going to try to pull this together for our show. So they were a series of 4 laws passed by the Federalist-controlled Congress in 1798 during the presidency of John Adams. They were passed in response to growing tensions with France and increasing domestic political conflict between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. They were seen as violating civil liberties and as a political tool to weaken the opposition. So there was one part was the Naturalization Act, extending the residency requirement for immigrants to become naturalized from 5 to 14 years.
Which we still use.
And the Federalists believed that immigrants, especially from France and Ireland, were more likely to support the Democratic Republicans. By delaying citizenship, the Federalists hoped to reduce the political power of these groups. Alien Friends Act.
I mean, this is also an interpretation of of machine learning trained data
Yes,
of what
it's
OpenAI wants you to go, which is very liberal.
Yeah, and I had another website pulled up also for this because
Because if you were to look at the arguments and the transcripts of the debates about it, it's a completely different thing. Like, one, France was not nice to us after we got out of our treaty, and it was not looked at as like, oh, these people are just going to come here and be able to vote right away. Like, we hadn't thought about like how long should somebody actually be here before that they should vote.
Well, and also it was at a time when we were at war with France, and they don't have that part here. So it's interesting how it summarizes this.
Tensions were high. Yeah, no, it was like we're not friends at all anymore right now.
Right.
So dumb.
So, I mean, and okay, so then also the part that's missing from here is that those who were supporting it, the Federalists said they were more likely to support the Democratic Republicans. So it would be the Democratic Republicans are also, what's happening here is that there are some people who want to support the French Revolution and some who do not. And so that is a huge political part of the context of this that's missing in the way that ChatGPT decided to deliver the information. So but the issue is that immigration is coming up. But the other thing is that in the process of that being a concern, the sedition part of this made it illegal to publish false, scandalous, and malicious writing against the government or its officials. The Federalists viewed the Sedition Act as necessary to curb opposition and criticism from the Democratic Republican press, which they saw as undermining the government, particularly during the quasi-war with France. Critics saw this as a direct attack on freedom of speech in the press, as many of those prosecuted under the law were Democratic Republican journalists.
So the way that I look at that moment too, and why it failed the Federalist Party, and they try to pin Washington as a Federalist, but he never was, right? He was both.
No, yeah, he tried to stay clean.
It was John Adams, who we all know was the diplomat during the Revolution, who was not the nicest of diplomats. He's a Scorpio, and he was hideous as far as like, if it wasn't for Benjamin Franklin, it probably all wouldn't have happened. Is that he's trying to play the federal role of protecting the country, right? So the problem is, though, is that he took actual people who had fought in the war and been here and blanketed the law on that, opposed to like, okay, I'm going to make sure you're only a citizen after this many years. And this is where it gets a little weird, because it's like, oh, I don't want people coming here and then joining that other party. You see that now, though. You see that the Republicans play that card still with the illegals. Although the irony in that whole thing is now you have the minorities joining Trump now in the Republican Party against the Democrats, because the Democrats are playing this card. Mm-hmm. So both parties have played this card.
Right. So is it this particular astrology where the issue is going to come up about who's an insider and who's an outsider, but also it's control of the government, right? It's the government saying they want, or it's control of a faction. A faction is in the government and wants to maintain control, or wants to do whatever it can to make the other side not win. And I don't know, when was the
That's
duel
where,
between...
so 1796, right? Mm-hmm. That's literally only 20 years after the Declaration. So Pluto's at the end of Aquarius. And so the Constitution's done with Pluto and Aquarius. Washington becomes the first president, not elected by the people, but by the people who were inside, right? So John Adams is the first elected president by the people, technically. And he's out there trying to do his diplomatic ideas of what he's seen on the other side. Like, you don't know what's out there. I've been there. You guys were all here. I was there. And this is how they deal. And this is how they get in. And they try to, because he was there witnessing people backstabbing people in the courts to get to the king. And da-da-da-da. I'm not saying he's right. I'm just trying to give that, like, end of Pluto Aquarius is another big threat. Pluto, like at the beginning of the transit, it was, look at the tyrant of King George and the taxation and all that shit. Now it's not about taxation. It's about, okay, now people that are going to come here into our freedom and take it away again. It's the same kind of thing, just flipped. Right? So like anti-establishment right now and doing that, and it'll be about anti-establishment again.
But the interesting thing is that however many years after the Stamp Act, right, they'd experienced this idea of not being able to print anything unless it was officially stamped or approved by the king. Yeah. And so here you have, after all of that, and after creating this freedom of speech clause, and after saying that's freedom for, all speech, then you have again something coming up that's trying to say certain types of speech will be sedition.
If you notice at the end of that, it had a term on it. It wasn't a blanket, no limit thing. It was only for a certain amount of time. And when Jefferson won the election because of this, he just let it expire. He didn't stop it either. He just let it expire. He didn't stop it, though.
Well, when did it expire? I mean, I don't think it was that long after he was elected. But what I'm noticing right now, live as we're looking at this, is how really select ChatGPT is with this summary, as we already said, and it makes me want to pull up the actual treaty. So I'm going to quickly do that.
Yeah, because I think that's like where the split happens, is you have Federalists, Anti-Federalists, but the Anti-Federalists don't ever get into power. So the only way they do it is they create the Democratic Republican Party under Jefferson, and that's the Anti-Federalists to really come in. And they want all the things that both parties today want. Liberty, freedom of speech. What you're hearing on both sides, like, you totally get, like, stay out of my energy. But then what's weird is the Democrat Party is the one that factions off first and stays and has never changed, except split before, but they stay. It doesn't matter what happened. Civil War, secession, they still stay the same party.
So it was the Federalists then becoming Whigs, then becoming Democrats. Is that, or like the eventually Democratic Party? I think.
Well, you could look at it as it's both ways. Like under Jefferson, under the Democrat Republican, it's very anti-federalist. It's very more about the people, more about the states' rights. Mm-hmm. And then when it goes Democrat, right, it's the anti-Mason movement that is against it. So the Democrat Party then switches to more federalist, and it stays that way. And then there's the moments like in the 60s of the 20th century that we've just been in, where you see the Democrat Party realize we have to change our ways because they don't vote for the Civil Rights Act. The Republicans do. The Ku Klux Klan were all Democrats. The Reconstruction was horrible, right? Like all those states just wanted to do everything that was doing under the Civil War, but they couldn't do slavery, so they did everything they could to make it still feel that way. So by the 60s, you see the Democrat Party switch and go, no, we're against the government, and we're for the freedom of people to be, and let's bring everybody under the tent. And then of course unfortunately in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, right, when you get FDR after the Great Depression and all that, he's the one who, Supreme Court had said, no, Social Security is illegal. He packs the court, gets the Supreme Court that he wants, adds more justices, and they repeal that and allow him to do Social Security, and the Democrat Party becomes the party of like, you're under our food and money again too, like slaves. Like, it's crazy.
So
they've always had the same thing going.
So if we go back to the sedition part of the Alien and Sedition Act, I just think it's really interesting that that was the first attempt by the U.S. government to really clamp down on multiple newspapers, I think, or the idea of too much information being spread. Yeah. And I find that really interesting for today. And I think if you jump ahead to the time of the 30s, for example, there's a situation in the 30s where it would be possible now for FDR, for example, uses the radio to broadcast his own message. Right. So you can see that, well, now we've got this situation in which one side gets the airwaves. And it was needed for the times, and it helped people get through the Depression. But on the other hand, it got people used to the idea that there could be just one message from one person coming, right? Because technology had evolved so that it could favor the top. So it's interesting that technology emerges where the top can control disseminating information to people versus the times when they can't. And here, this is really interesting where it says, newspapers flourished in the New Republic. Now, Benjamin Franklin's grandson took up the newspaper.
Temple.
I don't know, it wasn't Temple, I think it was his brother or something.
Oh, wow.
Took up his newspaper, but he didn't live that long. I don't remember, I looked into this at once, but one of his grandsons took on the newspapers, and it was really thriving. And in England too, there were newspapers from all perspectives. So, and that has been the case until modern times, where you have these conglomerations buying up all of the newspapers, or and it really
just happened
one view.
Just a month ago.
But at this time, every perspective has a newspaper. And even if you think of the Civil War, there were abolition newspapers and publications, and there were Democratic. I mean, when we were looking at the Lincoln-Douglas debates, it depended on which type of press you were looking at, how it was covered. And you can see it from all perspectives. Right. So that's what's really interesting about the 1790s, is that it says there were, by 1800, there were 234 being published once or twice a week, and the first dailies appeared. Between 1790 and 1820, over 400 new papers were started. Many soon merged or closed. Nationalism was a high priority, blah, 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 blah. All right, so, but it's just very interesting to me at this time. You've got the same sort of thing going on with the media.
You want to see the astrology and how mind-blowing it is to this moment? Because it's kind of scary. In 1796, it's a Jupiter square Saturn year, but Jupiter in Pisces and Saturn in Gemini. What's it right now? Oh, Saturn in Pisces, Jupiter in Gemini, big Jupiter-Saturn square.
Wow.
So that whole year was Jupiter in Pisces, square Saturn in Gemini. Venus retrograde in Leo. The first one happened last year, but the last time that it started a whole new transit was in 1770, was it? And then, oh no, so it would be, if this is in 96, 8 is 88, and then 1780, and then 1772. 1772 is the beginning of the Venus retrogrades in Leo, the way that we just started this year. So if you go down and look at this, Pluto 28 degrees at the end of Aquarius, the same way we're at Pluto at the end of Capricorn. So you could start to see how this gets really messy at the end of always a Pluto transit. In the beginning of a Pluto transit, it is messy in politics.
At the end or beginning of
and it doesn't matter
any Pluto transit.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if Pluto's in Aquarius or if it's in Pisces or if it's in beginning of Pluto Capricorn. It was messy. The end of Pluto Scorpio, it was what's going to happen after Reagan and all this stuff, and now Bush is gone, and now Clinton's in, and Clinton was the one that was in during that switch, and that was the first time we saw a president lie to the people straight up, like, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, and come back and apologize. I'm sorry, I did. You know?
Did he apologize? I don't remember that.
Yeah,
part.
remember he had to admit, he admitted it, and that was his way to get through the impeachment, was to get the American people to be like, you know what, he's a normal human being, he fucking fucked up. He, you know, that's how he got, that's how he beat the impeachment.
I was just going to add that Jimmy Carter once, what's the story? That he apologized because he had lust in his heart for another woman, but he didn't act on it.
Right.
So I just wanted to point out that someone else had.
An astrological way to look at it is to answer the very beginning of this. It's like, how do we end up here where we say we don't want these parties and all that, but then people have to screw up so bad for the other party to win. So, for example, this situation, oh my gosh, what, you're going to take away the First Amendment right from people if it's against officials and it's all that? Okay, that's what creates a new party, the Democrat-Republican Party, Jefferson, to win, and the Federalist Party's done after that. Look what's happening right now. The same thing's happening now. The Pentagon has put in there that the DOD can kill Americans in security and help local civil governments like kill citizens. Look at the Twitter files, the Facebook files, all that stuff, the misinformation bullshit and throwing people away, or Alex Jones case. You're allowed to say what you want. If you think that there was a conspiracy that people died but they didn't die and they didn't die that way or whatever, what, people could sue you, and then the federal government's helping those people and make it so absurd and $1 billion plus to ruin the person? That's why she won't win. Because she hasn't denounced any of it. She'd win if she say, yeah, Biden was messed up. He shouldn't have done this. He shouldn't have done that. He shouldn't have done this. He shouldn't have done that. He shouldn't have done this. He shouldn't have done that. And that's why the way that you would look at is, as I'm sure you would do as a historian, and be like, okay, so who was the Federalist that ran against Jefferson to lose? Because we know that was a horrible way of the American people having to go through all that, right? Mm-hmm. That you would be like, well, okay, so who? Oh no, my thing's doing that thing where it won't get off the. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Okay.
It's always that election of 1800 that comes back.
Yeah, I know. And that one's never counted in the Curse of Tippecanoe, but it totally should be because of the Jupiter-Saturn, but also the, right, because what happens is there's a new party, and it also is where Hamilton gets killed they're still in the term while he gets killed, right, by Aaron Burr. So what you look at is go, okay, Thomas Jefferson wins, and it's Aaron Burr, remember? And that's the other weird thing, that Aaron Burr, right, is the one that loses and then ends up being in a duel with the Vice President Hamilton, right, who's going to run with Jefferson, and it becomes horrible.
Why does it say October 31st to December 3rd? Was that the full election period? I know, obviously, elections ran differently, but it's interesting.
I mean, yeah, it's known as, it was held on October 31st to Wednesday, December 3rd, in what is sometimes called the Revolution of 1800, right? The Vice President, Thomas Jefferson, defeated the Federalist candidate incumbent, President John Adams. So.
I had asked you before we had the show today about Neptune in Pisces versus Neptune in Virgo. So could it be at all, does Neptune have any part in this story of why there could be so many newspapers and all these opinions and an effort to try to censor the press, but it didn't break out into civil war, right? People they weren't in these tribes that broke out into a war. Maybe because also they were invaded by the British not too long after that. I don't know. But why? Is there some reason astrologically that sometimes you get this situation where there's controversy and everybody comes out and we move forward versus like the Civil War period where Neptune was in Pisces?
This is where I will it actually isn't about Neptune in this one as more as it's about Pluto. The beginning of that Pluto transit in Aquarius was about the way the revolution started was through, Thomas Paine, all of his pamphlets, getting all this information out. So it's the irony that comes back of well, now people are doing it to put a check on it, and no, we're going to do what the English used to do. The Pluto transits are the ones that show you the beginning and the end. In the middle and all that is kind of course, it's exposing stuff to help you understand it, but it's more of an arc of time of somebody's life, from beginning to end, right? Pluto is the beginning of the situation and then the end of it. So it's the middle is really kind of, right? But that's where you see the highlight. So it's always take whatever it is. So a good example is Obama came in the beginning of Pluto Capricorn. Now you see him out there and people hate him. Black men hate him. All these women on MSNBC this week went, I can't believe Obama said that. We respect our men. He doesn't even respect black men. He's acting like he's back one of the slaveholders telling, you get those people to go do this shit. That's what they're saying.
Wow.
Right? Nobody would have ever said anything like that in 2008. Or, right? So it's the end. It's always the irony, right? Obama was all about hope and all this stuff. And now he's backing a candidate who's trying to say joy, but is out there calling Donald Trump Hitler. When she's the one playing hooky with, where do you stand on Israel? I don't know. But Trump's the one who's saying, no, I'm going to support the Jews. So if you want to use the Hitler thing, it's kind of a little weird because look what's happening in the world.
So I think it's funny because with Pluto and Capricorn, I always think about, wow, I survived it. Wow, you're surviving it, especially for you because of where Pluto is for you in your chart. But I never think about how the officials are experiencing it. But also if you think about Donald Trump at the beginning of the transit, wasn't he still The Apprentice, or was he still a reality star?
Yeah, in 2008, The Apprentice was one of the biggest shows of NBC.
Now there's The Apprentice movie.
Right, so it's kind of one of those things that, it was also him and Melania on Larry King Live, being normal guests once a year and to do a check-in.
I forgot all about Larry King. Wow, talk about a difference too if you look at media from the beginning to the end,
Right, so now, that's the other thing, right? It was about mainstream media that told us recession. Now they won't tell you recession, but if you go online, you talk to economists online, it's we're in a recession. Right. Then remember the government we went to where it said we're in recession and then they retracted and said we're redefining what recession is. That was 2 years ago. You remember that?
Yeah.
Right. So that's the irony is like the end of a Pluto transit will bring up everything at the beginning of it, but it will be the opposite. It'll be like, oh, wait, no, we're not going to follow those kind of rules. Right. We're going to do it different. And that's what Pluto is. Right. It's the manipulation.
So it's Pluto.
Yeah, and Pluto always tests you like, are you going to screw up and do what you did as an individual? Forget politics for a second. Like, what were the lessons in 2008 you went through? Are you going to do that again? It's always the opposite. Like, if you lost your job, you know now how to not lose your job, right, at this moment. Or if you're one of the people who were really secure at the beginning of 2008 and you didn't lose your job and you kept all that stuff, it's like all those benefits and all that stuff is all going to come into question. And you're like, I don't know what to do. That's the kind of creepy part of it all. But I would say that this is just the Pluto transit at the end, because if you were to like take Pluto that year and go the ingress of Pluto into Pisces, 1797. If you go prior to that, it was in the 1550s, right, with Nostradamus. But so it's the year before Pluto comes into a new sign, so it'd be like 2022. And that was the year that all this shit was happening. Meaning Pluto at the end of a sign in Aquarius, where it ends up ingressing into during the revolution or during our time, where it did make an ingress last year and all that stuff. But the year prior, people trying to do the craziest shit.
It finally, a light bulb just turned on for me, David. I just was like, finally I got it. Where, if you think about the timeline of the revolution, because I'm always applying it back to the past, at the beginning of the Pluto transit, that meant that the colonists, the American colonists, experienced something and they backed down. They didn't have a revolution. But at the end of the transit, there's actually a revolution.
Correct. And then
and the beginning of the transit is what time for that time?
For the American Revolution?
Yeah.
Well, it starts with Pluto and Capricorn, right?
What year was that? Do you
1776.
Pluto goes into Capricorn in 1776?
No, in 77.
It goes into Capricorn or Aquarius.
It goes into Aquarius, in 77.
So
and
when
then
did it go into Capricorn?
Oh, 1760-ish?
That's, okay, I finally got it, because I'm sorry, that's what I was sitting here thinking, I remember on, however many of your special presentations that you've done, you talk about the Stamp Act in the 1760s. And I'm like, yeah, I never connected. I'm sorry, but it was the beginning of the Pluto transit in Capricorn.
Right. And then it becomes a trade war in Aquarius. How did we get all France had to go through hell and go around the king to get the stuff over here during the Revolutionary War. It was like, don't let the king know this shit. Right. So it was done secretly. Benjamin Franklin made that shit happen. And so think of the beginning of the Revolutionary War with John Adams. He's the little pudger guy that they send over to Europe. Don't be here for this thing and go figure these things out with all these other people. So he has to be tough, because that's still like you're a rebel. Like at any minute, anybody could capture you and be like, you're going against the British government and we support them. Like whatever. So he's a tough person, but it's also like he's kind of the guy that doesn't get the limelight. So he's been waiting for it forever, and it's the end of Pluto and Aquarius, which it's been all about this, and he gets in and does everything that it was up against. So it's the Kamala Harris, it's the Joe Biden. Right?
Interesting.
Right, and maintaining the federalist thing that loses. Because that's what's weird, is once Pluto comes into Pisces, then it's like, oh, okay, we're moving into letting go of a lot of that stuff, letting it be more free. And I don't know how it's going to go, but let's see where it goes. Let's just see what happens. And it actually ends up better. But that's where Pluto Aquarius does not mean it. We begin the revolution. And it's a long revolution, and a lot of people have different ideas, and a lot of people have different things, and the clash between people is going to get greater, but in a more unified way, meaning like, okay, we're all on the same team, but we all don't agree on the same things, you know? And that's how I know, like, whether, you know, like the Trump thing makes more sense, because you got RFK, you got Tulsi Gabbard, you got all these people that are coalescing together. Doesn't mean that they're going to get along, but they're all on the same idea. And that's what works through Pluto and Aquarius. There's going to be a lot of infighting, but they're going to make it happen. Right now, there's no coalition around Kamala.
She has Liz Cheney.
Right, which she's not switching parties like Tulsi Gabbard. She's still staying a Republican. Her dad would fucking probably steal her heart out and take it for his own heart if she changed. It's like the Jimmy Carter. It was just his birthday, and they said, oh, he voted. He's literally knocked out, can't look at anything. He's 100 years old. And they're like, yeah, he voted. Who voted for him? If you were to go to Jimmy Carter and go, hey, he's in a wheelchair, like, right?
He's definitely hung in there for a long time.
But that's the whole weird thing of what's going on right now is like, you know, oh, Dick Cheney is now supporting that. This is the Benedict Arnold moment, remember?
Mm-hmm. But it's really difficult to try to figure out what is actually happening, I think, because there are so many alternate stories. Like, I feel like we're in the time of fractured newspapers.
Yeah.
But it's fractured media and types of media. And then you've got one side will say, this person's lying. And then the other side's like, this person's lying. Like, it's like an echo chamber where they'll say that, like, one side will say something and then the other side comes back and tries to accuse the other side of it.
Right.
And there's never proof, which drives me crazy. It's hearsay with people just, well, there are some people proving things. And then if you try to go and find documents and prove stories,
right,
you're the worst person ever.
I know.
You're a horrible human for doubting something. It's just a crazy time.
It is. And I wish we could go longer into this, but I guess that'll be the next one because I do have to go. I'm going to be on Jimmy Church's show and I have to do my sound check. But I think it opens people up to look at all these parties more and where do they come from? What's the history of them? Because, like, we don't start the country as these parties. It's just anti-federalists and federalists. And it was the anti-federalists that got us the Bill of Rights. So if without the anti-federalists, we wouldn't have our First and Second Amendments. Like, there was no idea. That was the last thing that was debated upon. And it didn't pass. It was Washington who made sure that it was added as first president. That's another interesting fact.
Yeah, and the fact that he stepped down after 2 terms.
So that's why he would not be a federalist.
Right. So tomorrow you're doing a special talk. Are you going to be talking about political parties at all, or what's the subject of your talk?
I mean, yeah, I'm going to cover everything. I mean, I'm basically through Hypergate and all the prophecy schools I've done, I made my own, through astrology, date of when we reach a moment where human history's never reached ever, of where it's this moment we've all been waiting for, of like what's really going on. Where everything, whether it's UFOs to the mixture of the political issues to the worldwide issues of war to all these things all coming together at one moment. And a lot of it, I have to thank Nostradamus for, to be honest. Like, he's the guide with a lot of it, with John Dee being another major guide of the more, well, they both are. But I'm going to help people understand what 2025 is about, how that event coming in the March 2025 will help define what 2025 is, because a lot of people are trying to define it off the basic, just looking at the transits without understanding the conversion of this X moment. That it's always the Roman numeral 10, and that's when it does go to a next level. There's only 9 numbers, but that's why the Roman numeral 10 is so interesting. And what is that actually? That's why you're starting to see, and people started tripping after I did that school. I don't know if you remember when like X came out, and so people were like,
it's
how
so
the
weird.
fuck are you predicting that shit? And I'm like, it's in the astrology. So.
Yes, you were the first on the X, whatever
Correct.
bandwagon, or you blazed the X trail, and then all of a sudden Twitter became X. But and then on Jimmy Church tonight, what are you?
Tonight we're talking about just everything crazy happening astronomically. Now we have 2 comets back to back, right? These Atlas comets, the asteroid stuff, and just whatever else him and I come up with, like what's happening, and it's gonna be cool because we have the other one that's right now beginning.
Where can we see that one?
That one I think is actually at sunrise, but it might be breaking apart. But today is a day that we can see. I'm gonna have to look. I'll have 30 minutes after my sound check to kind of like catch up to see what they found today, but it could be as bright as being able to be seen in the day.
Wow.
And we just had another one, so the one prior. So it's like,
And we talked
universe
about that
is-
comet of 1806.
right?
Was
The
that it?
universe is the universe is wanting us to pay attention.
Well, I'm going to be listening on my way home. Or I don't know when you start. The show
At
starts
7
at
o'clock,
7,
7 p.m. Pacific. Yeah.
All right.
All right. Well, much love to you all. Thanks for following us. Make sure you join us on High Vibe. Make sure you come. I'll be at that event live stream. Just go to highvibe.tv, click on the X moment, and we'll see you live tomorrow for that. I'll be doing full disclosure with Natalie prior. So
All right.
thank you, Ann. Much love to you all, and we'll see you all later. Adios. This is the trailer for tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Have you ever felt the universe pulling you towards something greater? A moment when everything changes, a pivotal point in history? That moment is now. The cosmos is aligning. Ancient prophecies, astrological signs, and secret codes all point to this singular event, the X moment. On Friday, October 25th, 2024, at 3 p.m. Pacific, join us live as David Palmer, the Leo King, unveils secrets long hidden from the world. Secrets decoded from the works of his Hypergate schools and 12 years of decoding. This isn't just another live stream. It's your final call to power. Imagine unlocking unprecedented personal strength, transforming your life with knowledge reserved for the select few, ascending to a higher state of being during humanity's greatest shift. Every civilization has its defining moment. This is the one that defines all civilization. This is yours, but time is running out. Hundreds of thousands have already embarked on this journey with David Palmer. They've transformed their lives. Now it's your turn. Do you want to fully understand the Leo King's biggest prediction in all time? The window to transform your destiny is closing fast. Will you let this moment slip away? Or will you step forward and claim the future that awaits you? Join us live on High Vibe TV, accessible worldwide. Visit highvibe.tv to secure your spot now. Prepare for a life-altering experience that will elevate your consciousness and unlock your true potential. The X moment is here. Are you ready to seize your destiny, or just think it's another day in time?